This is going to be kind of an art history class, along with some watching me do kind of a hands-on demonstration, because I am a painter at heart, but I love learning about art. And part of this class is just kind of learning how artists do what they do and giving a little context to that. So you'll get to see kind of a slideshow about an artist, and then we're going to go into the hows and the whys they paint what they paint. So it's kind of a two-parter. So I'm going to do the slideshow soon. I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen. And then once I'm done with the slideshow, I'll switch cameras so that you can see what I'm seeing when I'm painting. So does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay, perfect. Let me share. Okay, can you see what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
You see a portrait of a pastel?
I guess I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but the
Okay. That means you're seeing what I'm seeing. That is that is Chardin. It was a man. He doesn't have so many self-portraits, and he's always kind of wearing this headdressing. Just to give you context, this was a long time ago. He is from the 18th century. So he was born in 1699, just to give you some context. He's from the 18th century, and he's a master of still life. So when I first started painting, this is the first thing I painted was a piece of fruit on the table. And when I teach my students, I often start there too. But he is kind of the artist that modernized still life and kind of made it acceptable to paint. We kind of assume that these kind of genres and motifs were always there, but they weren't. So this was kind of groundbreaking, because what he did for still life is kind of made it okay to paint it. And now it's part of every artist's repertoire. Usually when you're learning how to paint, you kind of set up a still life, which is basically just a set of objects on a table with kind of a light. You can see the light is coming in from the left. You can see that with the highlights. And it allows an artist to kind of just slow down, use their eyes, and then start drawing different shapes, textures, and colors. So that was his primary concern. He did some portraits too, and some what they call genre scenes of people kind of doing everyday things like sweeping, for example, or cleaning. But he's mostly known for his still lifes, which are quite groundbreaking. And I should say they're beautiful. That's my opinion, but it's usually held by most that see his work. So you could see it here, just these kind of everyday simple setups here. But he's not trying to trick you into thinking like, oh, this is just happening, on his kitchen table. It's very intentional. So you can see it's intentional. He's setting things up, and we'll talk a little bit later, but he gives great care to kind of the balance of these objects. So as simple as they seem, they're actually quite complex in their inception.
Jim, what is this fellow's name again?
Chardin. It's Jean Siméon Chardin. So it's Chardin. He's a French painter. He's very popular in his own time too. So the Louis XV actually gave him a studio at the Louvre. So he was living and painting at the Louvre, which I thought was interesting, because I had never heard that it was an area or space for painting. So and a lot of these works, I think this one here in particular, they're at the Louvre, and you can visit and see them here. But he was a master in his own time. So sometimes these radical painters, I know you think radical, you think like crazy abstract art or something, but this was radical for his time, and it wasn't in line with what painters were doing at the time. So there's a style, actually I'll pause here. I just want to show you, just to get a close-up of how the paint is. Look at the steam coming off of that cup. So not only is he painting objects, right? He's painting kind of temperature, like heat, right? That's not easy to do. Just threw that one in there for detail. He was obsessed with these simple details. Let me go to this. This was kind of the style at the time, which is called Rococo, but fun to say, which is very kind of ornate, imaginary paintings. They're very theatrical, kind of like gaudy, for lack of a better word. And they drew on mythology, or allegory, meaning like this person here is symbolic of something, right? It's not what it appears to be. You know, this is a painting about something else. It's not about, you know, these floating cherubs here and this woman sleeping. I didn't do the work to even research what this one was about, but you could see here, you know, very, very different from what he's doing. So I'll show you. Oh, let me go back actually, just to compare to that. When I said it was groundbreaking and kind of shocking for its time, you can see why. So this is what's kind of in vogue. And then we have a man who's not leaving his house, just painting simple things like fruit and baskets and twine, right? That was radical for its time. But it's not without tradition. I'm going to go back here. This is, of course, Vermeer, who painted in the 17th century, famous Dutch artist, but also loved to just kind of slow down and look inside the home. You know, he painted, most of his subjects were happening in his home, and you could see he's giving as much attention to those objects on the table as he is that person, right? So he's kind of painting everything with equal importance, and he's a master of kind of these reflections and the way light hits objects, a very soft light. You could see that, and no one can paint like Vermeer. I think there's still a lot of controversy how he even painted, because he possibly used something called a camera obscura, which is like this, it's almost like an early camera that could kind of transfer light onto a canvas, so he could paint it in this certain way. It looks almost like a blurred photograph, but I regress. That's a different lesson. So Chardin wasn't, you know, he didn't come out of nowhere. There were artists doing this like him before, but he kind of takes it to the next level, because he's saying, hey, let's just look at the objects on the table. And basically he's looking at these things, and unlike the Rococo, where it's like, well, that person is a stand-in for some kind of emotion or feeling, that kind of frustrated him and some critics at the time. So he had a friend, I'm going to try to say his name, Diderot, Diderot. And he said, to look at pictures by other artists, it seems that I need to borrow a different pair of eyes. To look at those of Chardin, I only need to keep the eyes that nature gave me and make good use of them. So there's something very refreshing of saying what you're painting and what you're looking at are the same thing, that there's not this hidden meaning. So it's kind of saying it's not an intellectual experience, right? It's like a physical one. You use your eyes and you kind of see the beauty of every day, and that has value. And personally, that's something I can appreciate too, that it doesn't have to mean anything more than what it is, because that's a lot of reasons why I'm drawn to something to paint, is because it's something that's beautiful or captivating here. So you could see this looks like a very simple subject, but I went to a wonderful resource called artfactory.com, where I'm getting a lot of this information. And they broke it down here. You can see they broke down the shapes. So you can see the glass on the left. I'll show you here. And kind of the picture on the right. You can see they kind of echo one another. There's a lot of balance and counterbalance. So the glass, you can see, is kind of a cone, right? Upside down, and then it flips to make that other shape on the right of the picture. So they kind of mirror each other, but one's going one way, one's going the other. So there's some they call it counterbalance, right? It's dynamic because they're similar, but they're flipped. And you could see he's doing a lot of different things with the objects themselves. Even if you count, when you have two objects next to each other, that kind of creates a tension and an awkwardness. But then look at how he uses the garlic. He uses 3 to kind of break up that space. So you have, starting with the glass, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different shapes, right? And odd numbers kind of creates a more natural balance too. So these are all things that he's working out and obsessing over. He was prolific. He painted a lot, and he painted a lot of still life. Also, some of the balance have you ever heard of chiaroscuro, which is Italian? Caravaggio is a painter that used it, where it's a high contrast of dark and light. So you can see that dark background, and these objects kind of almost emerge and kind of like through the mist almost. So you can see the dark and light contrast. So he's using the shapes, right, kind of working with each other. He's kind of flipping those shapes upside down. He's using the value, which is the dark and light, and he's even using some color. So if you look at the background has kind of pinks and greens. So he's using two different colors at the same time. So Chardin, believe it or not, is old-fashioned as some of this stuff looks. It was an influence on contemporary and modern artists, and I'll talk a little bit about that soon. But because he wasn't painting kind of an emotional experience, he's just looking at shape and color and form, and he's just playing with it. So even though it looks like a glass of water, and someone might say, well, why would you paint that? He was interested in just the shapes, the colors, the textures, and some of those kind of elements that have are still influencing artists today. Okay, and just to talk a little bit about texture too. It's not the best photo, but I wanted to show you. He used thick paint too when necessary. So where the light is shining down on the scarlet, he would use thicker brush strokes so that it would actually pick up texture and shadow. And you can see the background is very soft. So he would give kind of a three-dimensional quality by using thick texture paint. Okay, love that image. Here's another one. I just want to talk about color in this one. One thing that he would do is kind of color harmonize. So what does that mean? Well, he would paint the whole thing. Usually he'd get in your background. So he used a lot of times kind of like a green reddish brown, right? And you can see it's greener in some spots, maybe on the right side, and a little redder on the left side in the shadow. And then he would kind of paint in all the dark areas, and then the mids, and then kind of the highlights, the bright areas. But what makes him a little different is he would take, like, let's say the red of the strawberries, and then he would work them into the red of the peach and the cherry. You could see underneath the flowers, there's a little red. And then look at the reflection on the glass. He's using the same red everywhere. So by using that little bit of red, he can connect every single object in this picture. Same with the green. If you start looking for the greens, you're going to see the green in the glass, the stems of the strawberries, the cherries, and then that green and red also shows up in the background. So that's not easy to do without, unless you're being very intentional about it. So that's something that he was concerned with, and something that he put into his paintings. You can see it here too. He's a master of reflection. So you can see those apples showing up in the goblet on the left, and then also reflected in the bowl. But all the colors are kind of bouncing back and forth. So he's using shapes, textures, color, all these elements, right, to tell less a story about this table. Like, some of these objects don't even make sense together, but it's more about a story about composition. Just to show you, that goblet shows up again here. Oop. Let me get rid of that. Excuse me. But that silver cup shows up. He would use the same objects over and over again. Even those apples, don't they look similar? But you could see sometimes his subject matters were a little more simple, and then sometimes they were a little bit more complex. But if you don't think still life can be a masterpiece, just take a look at that one. Okay, so this is, I think this one hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But when I was talking about his influence on other painters, I'm going to start with this one, because starting around the time of the Impressionists, they were huge fans of Chardin. And the Impressionists also used still life. They also used still life to kind of explore the themes and ideas of Impressionism, which were kind of breaking away from kind of the norms to try to paint something to look as real as possible. And then all of a sudden it shifted to, like, let's show actual paint. Let's think about color and composition. Let's break away from these traditions that have kind of been holding us down. Even perspective is a little different. It changes within a picture of an Impressionist painting. But this is pretty much a response to this. So this is Monet, excuse me. This is the painting Monet, not to be mixed up with Monet. But it's a direct response to his compositions, and he was influenced by him. And you can see it pretty directly here. So Monet would also set up these still lifes and these tabletop kind of compositions and explore the same ideas, you know. So like when I said it was radical what he was doing, you can see it here. Monet is a little less concerned with like the surface texture because everything's kind of painted the same, whereas Chardin is a little bit more concerned with saying this is matte, this is wet, this is shiny, this is glass. Monet kind of paints everything in a kind of unified way because he likes to say this is paint. He wants to tell you everything here is paint. Here's another Chardin. And you can see here, this is Cezanne. So what's different about Cezanne is he's saying, hey, you know, real life, we're moving everywhere. When I'm painting, I'm moving around. So my point of view changes. And that's why that back table line, you can see it's curving downward. It's almost like a slope or a hill. And his background is painted in the same way as the foreground. So that wallpaper is coming forward and it kind of flattens things. Looks like those fruit might just fall off the table, but the same ideas about color and shape and balance and harmony, you know, those are all things important to Cezanne. So those ideas remained from Chardin to Cezanne. You can see this is a little more abstract, but working out the same ideas. You find that in art history that it doesn't, some of these things never change, right? It's all just an illusion of paint, shape, and color. Okay, this is
Matisse.
oh, this is actually, I think I said Cezanne. This one here is Matisse. And see what Matisse does. Matisse really starts to go off the deep end, and he doesn't care about perspective almost at all. So he's just showing you different objects look like they're kind of floating here, and he starts to get really abstract. So he starts paying attention of like kind of the negative space in between objects. Something that Chardin did too. There's a harmony to it. I picked this one because of the fish or the skate, I think that's called. But look at that knife hanging off the table too. He's really a master of light and dark. Okay, and then here's Braque, which is, you might know his buddy Picasso, but Braque was one of the most famous Cubist painters. So if you've ever heard of Cubism, they did a lot of those tricks with perspective and shape. They did that with still life. So it also kind of, the source is all Chardin on this. So the deeper I dug, the more I felt it led to him. You can see there with the fish too.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but is Chardin anywhere in Washington where we can see his things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll look that up. I don't see a ton of his art. I feel like I saw one in Richmond recently. There might be one. They had a little gallery called Small French Paintings, which I think has moved from the East Wing to the West Wing. So there might be one or two there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know the one. I know the gallery you're talking about. He
used to hang there.
Wow.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Somewhere I can look for him.
I know.
I
And
think it's stunning.
They're a wonder in person too.
Mm.
The biggest collection that I've seen was at the Louvre.
I'll have to go.
Yeah, we all should go next week. Next class at the Louvre.
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. Okay, and I'm just gonna transition to a more contemporary artist. This is Morandi, another artist who didn't leave his house. They said that all his subjects had dust covered on them, but he would set up objects in the same way. So the ideas remain from Chardin, and you can see it echoed throughout art history here. You know, obviously a different palette, you know, everything's kind of muted, but it has that kind of quiet feeling. That's kind of the adjective I use to describe Chardin, is quiet, right? There's a stillness, because he's saying, hey, this is important to look at the everyday. You know, notice what's on your table, and just look, you know, to slow down and look. there's ever been a time in human history just to slow down, now might be it. And still life is a great way to experience that. This is Morandi too. I love his work. It's almost, I don't want to say it's naive in the way it's painted, but you could see it's very unfussy, very soft. He doesn't overdo it. And I mean, it's hard to do. There's some tension there, the way those objects are set up, one right next to each other too. I just threw in this artist. His name is Hammershoy. He's a Danish painter from the early 1900s too, but like Vermeer, like Chardin, there's a quietness too of just the house and the everyday object. He painted mostly rooms, sometimes with people in them, but different rooms in his house. But just to show you the influence here, another Chardin. Look at the glass, right? Anybody who's tried to paint glass before will know just how difficult it is. And take a look at that, that you start to get familiar with his objects. They become like friends, right? That you see over and over again. Whereas sometimes, Whistler or Rodin would have people reappear in paintings over and over again. Chardin does that with objects. And this is Diebenkorn. We covered him last year in one of my classes, or maybe that was in winter or spring, but same idea. And this artist was painting up until pretty recently, in the last 50 years. So ideas still remain. Still okay to paint still life and objects. Okay, I think that's my last one. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything they'd like to share?
I'll just say I'm glad you did this gentleman.
Oh, good.
Because I love these still lifes.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. I can't wait to look. I haven't been down in a while, so I was planning on the next week or so to go down anyway. So
yeah.
Jim.
Yes.
Okay, who is the current painter? Who is the name of this painter that you have on the screen?
This is Richard Diebenkorn. It's Diebenkorn, I believe. He's mostly known for abstract works. He's a rare painter that started abstract and then in his old age moved towards realism. Usually it's the opposite. So I like his work because his abstracts look real and his real paintings look abstract.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I guess takeaway, just if I had to say one thing is, with Chardin, slow down and look, right? He gives you permission to slow things down and, appreciate the way shadow of a stem falls onto, the round surface of a pear. The more you look, the more you see. And that itself, that's a real, has real life application, right? When the more you look, the more you see. And if you slow down and pay attention, Chardin can help you do that with paint. So I think I'm going to switch now. So I'm going to kind of jump off and jump back in on my phone so that I could stick it on the tripod so you can see me paint a little bit. Okay, let me switch around here. So I do realize, there's some limitations with the technology here, but the priority is for you to see my canvas. So what I'd like to do is kind of zoom in on that. But just really quick, I'll show you, I'm picking up glare here, but you can see the subject matter that I'm going to be using. So that was the painting we talked a little bit about in terms of the composition here. But it's this one. That's what I'll be looking at. So you're going to be mostly seeing my canvas, but I'm going to attempt the impossible, right? Which is copying a painter. The materials don't change so much. Sometimes an artist has, very specific techniques and materials, but, from what we know, Chardin used oil paints and he used a combination of kind of thin and thick brushwork. They call that impasto, but he would get really thick with the paint. So what I'm planning on doing is kind of taking you through a step-by-step on how he may have painted his work. You know, I don't have the benefit of time, right? I have a shorter kind of schedule here to get things going. So, you know, just know this isn't exact. It's not an exact science, but hopefully I can get some of the qualities of a Chardin down here on my canvas. So I'll be painting today with oils. And if you have questions along the way, please feel free to ask. So really quick, well, maybe I'll start here on the canvas. It was a canvas board, right? See Frederick's canvas board, and it's just primed. Most canvases, when you buy them, are primed with gesso. That's the white on the front. And then I covered it with some acrylic so it would dry fast today. You can prime an additional, you know, you put additional colors on your canvas so you don't have to start with white. But if you use oil, you have to let it dry. But I used acrylic today because oils can always go on top of acrylic. And then I used kind of a brown that I made through, I used some burnt sienna and some green, a little phthalo green, and then a little red. So that's why we have that red-green kind of surface here, which is kind of arbitrary. I just kind of put it everywhere. But, you know, looking at the subject here, you know, it's lighter in some areas, darker in other, but it's a good starting point. Okay, here's my palette. You can see I used just a sheet of glass here, so it can be cleaned pretty easily with a straight razor. But I have a range of colors. I never know what colors I'm going to use. So I have about, you know, 20 colors out. Some of them I didn't put all of them out. There's like some magentas and a couple different blues, but I tried to use the colors I thought I was going to today. So I have the titanium white, I have a lemon yellow, a cad yellow, and then a cad yellow deep, which is kind of this orangey yellow. And then I have a vermilion, which is this kind of pinkish red, and then a cadmium red, and then a cerulean blue. This is just if you're keeping track at home. There's burnt sienna, burnt umber, you know, my warm brown, my dark brown, ultramarine blue, and then a little black. I didn't put on any yellow ochre. Maybe I need that, maybe not. We'll see. You can always put some out. And then just to thin the paint a little bit, I use Gelkid Light. Just a little bit of that helps thin the paint. And just remember to take the proper, if you're using oils, proper precautions with oil paints. That's always one of my concerns is safety. So I'm not using, you know, some of the heavy duty solvents that you can put into paint. I'm trying to keep it simple and use mostly paint. That's usually the trick. Okay, I have a couple bristle brushes that I'll be using here. You can see them here, a large and a small. It's a filbert brush, which means it's rounded on top. And I'm going to be using that for most of the sketching in. But from what I've read and what I gained is that Chardin did some sketching in with the darks first, and then he would build up to the lights. And this is very typical of how a lot of paintings start. I typically go dark to light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some burnt sienna and a little ultramarine blue. And I'm going to do some sketching. And what is a sketch? Well, a sketch is just like, it's a line drawing, really. But if you do it with paint, you know, I always like to think of paintbrushes as kind of clumsy tools that allow me not to be perfect. The nice thing about Chardin is his tabletop is never really a straight line anyways. It looks like he's painting on stone or something. It's not a kitchen table, it has to be exactly straight. But there is my kind of line for the picture plane. You can see that's down here. And I just want to sketch in some elements. And this part, you know, can take as long or short as you want it to. Typically when I'm doing demonstrations, I don't fuss too much about the drawing, knowing that the drawing can be wrong. But sometimes you spend all that time and it's still wrong too. So if it's really important, this is like a commission or something that was very important to me, I would spend the time to get the drawing exactly right. But right now, what I'm trying to do is just kind of block in, right, some of these shapes, make sure they have enough room to kind of exist. Do you see that? I'm not being super technical with it. I'll come to that later. Usually a good rule is that you tighten up as you paint. So in the beginning, you know, keep it loose, get things kind of where you want them to be on the canvas first. And remember that space in between the two shapes, right? It's like a parallel line on an angle here. And by working from that dark background first, look at how so much work is done for me already. For years, I would start with a white canvas. The more I read about artists, a lot of artists cover their canvas with something first. So it's much easier for me to kind of pull these shapes out on kind of a neutral background than having a bright white background. Okay, drawing in that back line. And then I guess I'll fill in these little garlic pieces. And I'm just doing this to make sure I have enough space. It's all about kind of the space in between objects. All those abstract and impressionist artists I showed you, they're very concerned about not just the shapes the objects make, but what are the shapes that are in between, right? Okay, and then it looks like there's a flower or something here. I'm just sketching that in. Now already, you know, I didn't invest a ton of time. I don't know if that was maybe less than 5 minutes, but I already could kind of assess, like, is this working? Do they need to be bigger, smaller? You know, on a different angle? I have to accept that it can't be perfect, but it's a good start. And then from here, I can start kind of blocking things in, and I'm going to start blocking in my shadows. So the nice thing about Chardin is if a color shows up, you know, here on this object, chances are it's going to show up here, 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 everywhere. There's a unity to his colors. It's almost, I don't want to say monochromatic, because you saw that one had red and green, which are not monochromatic at all if you think of the two of them together, but there's a balance there that he's using the same colors over and over again within the same picture. So I'm going to switch to a bigger brush. I'll go to this one. And I'm going to start filling in the background. So I'm going to start with my dark. And I'm going to play up that green on, I see kind of a dark green over here. Maybe I use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. It's a great base for a dark. It's a warm dark. Maybe a touch of yellow. Let's see what that gets. Oh, and that's too brown, right? You don't know what you get till you put it down on the canvas. So I'm going to use more blue. Because the background is a color, right? Because it's already color, I don't really know the right color until I put it down there. You can do all the mixing you want on your palette, but it's really not until you get on the canvas that it starts to look like what you want it to look like, possibly. See what I'm doing here? I'm starting to block it in. Painting is all layers. It's one layer on top of the other. Some artists use less layers. Like you can see that artist Brandy, the one with the pastel still life, he's using less layers, but there's still layers there. Chardin, I'm thinking probably using 2 or 3 layers to complete his painting. There's that dark background, and then he's building up. It's all kind of an approximation. It's never Perfect. You can see it's I don't want to say it's lackluster, but look how brown this is, right? And by using kind of those neutral colors in the background too, he allows those colors of the objects to really jump out. So a lot of artists will use kind of dull backgrounds and save the color for the fruit. Okay, now what's happening here is as I come over here, it actually needs to stay lighter here. If I paint the whole background dark, I won't really be true to the photo of the subject, right? It gets lighter over here, but I don't want to paint this light yet. I actually want to get in some of my darks here. Remember, I'm going dark to light. So again, I said I was going to use a little yellow in there. I didn't end up needing so much. I'm mostly using blue, ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna. And maybe even a little burnt umber that makes it a little more black. Because I really want it dark here. So I'm going to fill this in. Now with oils, things are going to stay wet all today. I'm not going to be able to paint wet paint on dry paint. So just keep that in mind. With acrylic, I can kind of let things dry and paint over them. So that's a challenge with oils in one sitting. I'm trying to replicate an artist who sat down, a couple times on a painting. Okay. You can see I'm just getting some of that dark in. I see it's pretty red, this object here. So I'm going to add some red in there. It's pretty fun. Now it's tempting to go right in and start getting out some of those highlights, but I'm going to wait. Highlights that come later. To be true to, what I read about his style is darks first, then mediums, then highlights. But what's great is once by blocking this in, I'm going to start to be able to relate that to that background. I can start putting those lights in on the right side pretty soon. What's good is I have this color on the brush. And once you find your colors, getting a little glare there, you can see it there. But once you get your colors, you're going to be able to kind of work it all around in the entire painting. So next time you paint a still life, think about it that way, that you can use the same colors throughout. You don't have to constantly mix up brand new colors. That you can almost simplify life by using similar colors everywhere. Okay, not bad, right? Be kind to yourself too, right? In the beginning, it's hard to get things right. It's a process, keep that brush moving. I sometimes say it's better to get something down that's wrong than to get stuck. See how I'm getting that dark in here for that glass? Man, already it's starting to look like something. A glass is kind of an absence, right? It's not really anything but a reflection of everything that's around it. So it's a reflection of that background. It's a reflection of, that garlic that's around it. Just trying to fill that in using some of that background color. This is turning green. It's what I like about Chardin is he has a real kind of dry look. So I sense he didn't use so much medium. That means like the stuff that you mix in with your paint. It looks like the paint's a little dry. There we go. Trying to get in some of those blues. Why blue? Well, again, he's using blues on the glass and then kind of reds on this object here. And as you paint, you notice mistakes. Like I notice my shape here. This is more conical, right? So I can adjust it and make it a little thinner here. Maybe I'll do that. I can use a little white in the background. Remember, it's like a push and pull. Look at how I can use the background to change my shape. Right. And maybe I go in here in the background. I'm always into these kind of gray paintings. Please jump in too if anybody has any questions. But getting that light side in, that's important. Now I get a lot of control from the paint by not using a lot of it. It looks like I'm using a lot, but I'm dipping in the paint. There's not a lot of medium. You know, if you're using acrylic, there's not a lot of water, things mixed in with it. And it's kind of a dry brush quality. See how that's starting to come through? Now I can go in with my background color to change the shape, and then I lost it a little bit too. So now I'm going to go back in once more and adjust. It's a push and a pull. Rarely do you get it right on the first try. You know, all we see is the end result. We don't see the struggle. So take it from me. As a painter, it's the struggle, right? That's the point. And I'm sure you feel it too. Once in a while, it's easy and it just happens, but that's usually because you either practiced it or it's you had a happy accident. Sometimes that happens too. But I often am asked, like, do I need talent to paint? And that is the wrong way to think about things, because talent does not excite me, because it also kind of means you didn't necessarily work to get there, right? Talent's something you assume you're born with. You know, certainly some of us are drawn more to art and painting, but I've seen a lot of so-called non-artists become great painters just by practicing. And for every one of these I do, there is obsession. So I keep saying Vermeer, but Chardin was obsessed, and he kept painting same things over and over and over again. You see that same theme with so many artists. Rarely do you see, oh, he just, created this masterpiece and then went on to the next thing. There's, 45 paintings before it, working out all those details. Okay, I'm just filling it in here, just something solid. The fun thing about copying a painter too is you get to kind of bring yourself to the painting. It's like a conversation that you're having with someone, often they're long gone, but just like we saw Manet having a conversation, I'm having one too. Okay, here's some, kind of left off my shadow here. Switch to a smaller brush. Sometimes as you paint, your brushes get really messy. So take the time, either grab a new brush if you're lazy, or take the time to clean it. I told someone in a class the other day that sometimes it takes an emergency for us to get out of our seats and to move and to pour new paint and to stop. We're just kind of in automatic mode. So, but take the time to do those things. Okay, getting that blue shadow in. So just to zoom out here, see what I'm looking at? Not bad. It's tiny on my phone, but hopefully you can see some of the detail. I'm gonna use my fan brush here. Like what the fan brush can do, it kind of blend that shadow and make it soft. Soften it. I'm getting some streaks here too. When you paint up and down, usually that can cut down on streaking. If you paint left to right, you often get streaks. So just keep that in mind. And when they dry streaky, you tend to not, you can't really undo that. You have to let it dry. You have to fix it while it's wet, I should say rather. Okay, getting too fussy with the details, but we're getting there. You work the whole picture. Okay, I think I'm gonna get the dark down here. You know, I say as a rule, work dark to light, but you could see I bounced around. It's too tempting sometimes not to work and finish an area. My very brown painting. I should say, like, everyone has different tastes too, but I like how subdued it is. You know, and then I feel like Chardin's colors are some of the brightest because he surrounds them with browns and grays. All like Vermeer too. You know, it's not until you get to those contemporary artists where you start to see those really bright colors. And some of us are just drawn to that. They just love color. But I like the subtlety here. All right, so I kind of have my lights. Sorry, I have my darks and my mediums. And now I'm kind of trying to build up to some lights. So I'm gonna start to go in the glass. I'm gonna use a little cerulean blue. And try to work in some blue into that. What happens is there's so much brown. The brown takes over, and the ultramarine isn't kind of strong enough to overpower the brown. It just turns gray. Cerulean's a nice kind of crystal blue. Try to get that water in. I'll do a close-up here of the glass. Kind of see what's happening here. And then once I have this color, I should be able to put it in different areas. And kind of work it everywhere. You're putting the same colors everywhere with this style. You can see I was so loose with my paint that now I'm just starting to tighten it up a little bit just by showing a few highlights. It's great because when you paint loose, you're allowed to be loose. When you paint tight and everything needs to be perfect, then actually everything needs to be perfect, which is really, really challenging, right? So my ellipse here, right, that circle in perspective on the top of the glass is imperfect because I'm painting in a loose style and I can kind of get away with it. But some painters, you know, if you go real kind of photographic and have a real tightness, it's hard to get out of that sometimes. So you set your own standards. So if you say, hey, this is a loose painting, you get away with more than if you're super, super tight, if that makes sense. Now I'm going back with some of these darks. should mention this is like they call this getting into the zone, you know. It's a nice part of a painting when everything's covered. You have everything kind of filled in, and then you can just go and make adjustments. In the beginning, you don't know where to start sometimes, and then near the end, it's like you almost have too much to do. All right, I think I might be ready for this this garlic here, and then there's a little flower too. And then we'll do some highlights. Please, at any point, if you have questions, let me know. Doing some brush cleaning, so I'm going to go to a very light color. I'm going to use blue as kind of the base and just try to paint in some of this garlic here. Now there's brown paint underneath, so that's why I'm using blue. Hopefully it kind of blends in together. Look at that, doesn't that glow? Again, I'm just blocking in the shape. We'll do a little close up here, I think. Now my spacing's pretty good, but yeah, I think it's pretty good. Okay, see how I blocked that in? What a different painting it is now. And then here it looks like there's some kind of flower, but it's done in these just a couple unfussy brush strokes. Right, and it kind of creates this harmony of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of main objects, and then another one here to kind of balance. Okay, I'm gonna do some shadows here on the garlic. Right, everything is attached with a shadow. Shadow is like a base or an anchor, or glue. It sticks everything together. Otherwise, your objects tend to float, which you probably don't want. Unless you're Matisse, then it doesn't matter. Okay, see that? Just to zoom out here. Not a bad little painting. It's been a long time since I've painted still life personally, so it's fun to return to something. Been so into landscape, but I'm going in with some cerulean blue, just adding a shadow. In this case, I added all the whites first, and then I'm adding the shadow on top of it. I didn't want the white to get to dull by painting on top of something brown or blue, so that's why I did that first. It's okay to break rules if it gets you there. However you get there, in the end, it matters more than following kind of these rules that we set for ourselves. So it's more like, think of it as structure when you're lost and you don't know where to get started. Okay, they seem to have some dimension now, which is good. I think I'm going to use some of that red that I saw in this object here, the picture. Now I'm going to add some of that red in here. And it will hopefully bring out the lighter value, right? Everything has a dark, medium, and light usually. There's some red under there. Really brought it out. You know, I didn't do that till the very end. It'd be tempting to do that stuff first, but I try to work from dark and work up to light. Okay, now I'm going to get some green, ultramarine blue, and that cadmium yellow. Maybe a little vermilion, cerulean. No, I'm shouting out colors because I don't know. Cerulean. Okay, then I'm going to put looks like there's like a flower here coming off the table. So I'm going to do that stem. Almost black. Just in shadow here. It's hard when you don't know what something is, it's hard to paint it. But it's almost like a little abstract design here. I'll show you what I did. Like a little flower there. And when you look at the original, it's just as abstract. But that stem also has a shadow. Don't forget your shadows. I might just leave it like that. Who knows what that is? Could have left it off too, but I like the harmony. All right, home stretch here. I think it's time to add some highlights. Where are those highlights? I'm going to go thick paint, thick kind of dry paint. And I'm going to add something to warm it up, a little yellow to my white. So I'm not using pure white. Maybe even a little burnt sienna, just to warm it up a touch. And I want to go kind of thick with the paint. This is impasto, where it's thick paint, really textured. You could do that with acrylic too, but it actually has surface texture, right? And by doing that in a few spots, it feels like three-dimensional. Paint has dimension. Okay. And this is the kind of the big picture here, is that color that I'm using shows up everywhere. It shows up in the glass. It shows up in the garlic. It shows up in the flower, and it unifies, it connects it all together. Maybe a little bit up here. There we go. This area here is, I overdid it. That always happens. If you don't overdo it sometimes, that means you're painting perfectly, which I haven't seen yet. Ooh. Right, isn't that just it? Yeah, on a roll and then you mess it up. That's the journey. Okay, get that here. Okay, it's looking good. And then I'm gonna get some of my highlight here on this guy here. Just some highlights. Right, you get the shininess there. I'm pretty confident at this point, so I'm going thicker with the paint. You can build up to this thickness too. It doesn't have to be perfect. But I'm feeling pretty good in the zone. I don't even know what this thing is, but I think I painted it well. It's a little picture. Okay, and then here's something you can do too, is I'm gonna take a dry brush, meaning a brush with not so much paint on it, and kind of drag it on top of some of these highlights where I overdid it. Just soften it a little bit. There, tone it down. And then maybe here on this one, the highlights are almost blue in the original photo. So that's something I don't do in my own stuff, a blue highlight. Usually I make them really warm, but something about how the light is hitting that object makes it a little more blue. Okay, now I can kind of look, kind of assess the whole thing. Just want to back up, right? Not a bad copy. I should say Chardin is it's kind of close to me in terms of how I learned how to paint. So my teacher really liked Chardin, so she was influenced by him, and so I was influenced by him. So I feel like I've learned to paint with some of these techniques. So it's not a total kind of fish out of water scenario, which sometimes happens when you copy a painter. You're doing something totally different, but this was my first class in a while, and I wanted to feel good and comfortable and confident. So I used somebody that I really love to paint like. So I think I'll zoom out, kind of see it, and kind of make one last assessment. Is that everything that I want to do? Did I kind of accomplish it? I think good enough for now. Not bad. The best thing about painting, guys, too, is it's all layers. So there's nothing I did today that would mess me up tomorrow. So it can dry, I can go back and I can make even more kind of adjustments to fix things the way I need them to be, you know, to meet whatever standard I'm trying to hit. But for now, I'm gonna call that finished. Does anybody have anything they want to share or any comments? Anybody working on their own? Oh, Fran, I think you're muted.
Oh, I really like your painting.
Oh, thank you.
Really lovely. The jug. I love the jug, is so good.
Thank you.
Wow. Something to work towards.
Yeah.
For me, not you.
Yeah. Well, you know, I feel like as you're just kind of like, as you paint, I guess you collect friends, and those friends are your artists, right? And so that's constantly changing. So the artists I look to today are different from a year ago to 10 years ago. And, you know, it's just kind of like listening to, you have tastes that are constantly kind of changing in some ways. And then there's kind of old favorites, but that's true with painters too. You know, I say just keep going and looking at art. The only time I'm not inspired is when I'm not looking at art or going to gallery. You know, there's you're always surprised at every show.
Well, it's just when you go down to the Smithsonian and you pick a room to walk through, it's always something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes those paintings have been there the whole time, but you're different.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, there's a great Whistler show. I think it's only maybe another week or so, but it's The Lady in White. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, it's coming October 2nd or 3rd, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
So the last chance, but they have some really great paintings there, and they have a whole room of painters influenced by that Lady in White painting. And they have a John Singer Sargent that's just incredible, and some paintings from the Tate Gallery that haven't been here. So it's worth the trip, just because these paintings have traveled from all over the world to be here.
Yeah, I can't wait to go. Yeah. I might see you there.
Yeah. Anybody else want to share anything or working on anything?
I love the way you did the garlic. I mean, it's clearly not, very smooth, and it really gives it that 3D effect.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sometimes, like, I would say they're not as realistic maybe as I would have painted them, 10, 15 years ago. I would have been a little bit more stiff and fussy. But there's something about the simplicity of it that I was going for that Chardin can do. It's kind of like how real can you make something using the least amount of color and value and, you know, brush strokes. When something needs 1,000 brush strokes, it's usually because you're struggling. But the really kind of masterful painters do it with less. So I think that was what I was trying to do, is kind of make them look three-dimensional with less, as small amount of brush strokes as possible. But thank you. All right. Well,
Jim, you do know you only did this in like 30 minutes, right?
I know. I always have a little.
That is amazing, though. It is just truly amazing how you can create that in like
Thank you.
such a little time. It's just amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me paint for a little bit on a Friday morning. It's what better way to gear up for the weekend, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much, Jim. It's really enjoyable today. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Really liked it. Yeah.
That will give me grace the next time I do one and it doesn't turn out as well.
That's right.
That can happen.
Yeah, we'll forgive you.
All right. Well, I'll see you all in the next virtual class, if not before.